Hello everybody and welcome. I am Atomic Zero of Addicted to Loot, and today we're going to be talking about Total War Warhammer faction, specifically the Dwarven faction. This video is going to be the first in a series of videos encompassing all factions found in Total War Warhammer. So that's going to be the Dwarves, the Empire, the Vampire Counts, the Greenskins, and the Chaos DLC faction. My goal for these videos is to help you decide what faction fits you best, or maybe just what faction you want to play first. I know ultimately we're all probably going to play each faction eventually, but maybe you don't know which one to play on day one, and that's what I'm hoping to help you figure out. So we're going to get into how these videos will be structured, and this is going to be pretty consistent across all videos. But first, we're going to cover a brief summary of the lore for each faction. We're going to go over what gameplay mechanic is unique to that faction, how that faction handles diplomacy, technology, what types of settlements they can inhabit, as well as the army composition and strategy. So let's dive right into it, and we'll get our feet wet in the lore of the Dwarves. The Dwarves are one of the original races in the Warhammer world, including the High Elves and the Minions of Chaos. The Dwarfs, as they called themselves, were primitive people using tools of flint and made their homes among the mountains, specifically the World's Edge Mountains. The race was able to flourish into a new age with the help of their Dwarven gods Grungi, Grimnir, and Balara. They were said to actually be birthed by the mountains themselves and actually took on a dwarven form when the race was first starting out. If I haven't said this already, if I butcher any one of these names, I apologize for anyone who knows the proper pronunciation, but I'm going to be doing it continuously throughout the video, so my apologies ahead of time. These settlements were founded around rich veins of metal, and they grew in numbers until they covered the World Edge Mountains. The larger, more fortified settlements became known as Karax, which is the Dwarven word for mountain stronghold. The first great enemy the Dwarves faced was the demons of Chaos. Listening to their gods, the Dwarves fled underground into their mountain holds to weather this new storm of magic. When the Chaos portal opened up, the winds of magic that flooded out from the Chaos portal literally bashed against the World Edge Mountains, forcing the Dwarves underground. The Dwarves never learned to love or even like magic after this point, and developed a racial protection against magic. Even if a dwarf wanted to learn magic, which I'm not even sure why they would, their own body would prevent them from conjuring anything. To combat magic, they would eventually learn the craft of enchanting weapons and armor with mystic ruins. When the Dwarves left their mountain holds, they discovered that demons stalked the land, and it wasn't long until the Chaos demons assaulted the Dwarves. The first race the Dwarves encountered was the High Elves when Grimnir encountered Kalidor Dragon Tamer when he made land with an elven navy. A group of Chaos demons interrupted their exchange of pleasantries, and a hesitant alliance was formed between the races to combat the storm of chaos. Eventually, the Chaos portal was silenced by the combined efforts of Kalidor and Grimnir. Not heeding the warning of the other dwarves, Grimnir ventured into the Chaos waste to close the portal himself, basically by trying to bash it shut. Unbeknownst to him, Kalidor was conjuring a powerful spell that finally closed the Chaos portal. Unfortunately, Grimnir wasn't ever seen again, but it is fabled that he met his fate trying to close the Chaos portal by combating numerous demons flooding out of the gate as Kalidor's spell eventually closed it. The defeat of the Chaos portal led to the golden age of the Dwarves. The arrogance of the elves soon became too much for the Dwarves, as Dwarven trade convoys were attacked by elves. Attempts were made by the Dwarves to settle their differences diplomatically, but this came to a head when the elves shaved the beard from a Dwarven ambassador and killed other Dwarven envoys that had accompanied him. This grievance could not be overlooked by High King Gottrek Starbreaker, and thus starting the War of Vengeance, also known as the War of the Beard. This war lasted for centuries and only ends as Gottrek defeats and kills the Elven Phoenix King Kalidor II in the Battle of Tor Alyssei. The Phoenix Crown, one of the most prized possessions of the elves, was taken by Gottrek to fulfill the grudge. Throughout the war with the elves, not one Dwarven settlement received recordable damage, since the elven war machines could not penetrate the Dwarven defenses. However, it was the planet itself that caused the fall of the mighty Dwarven Empire. Massive earthquakes and volcanic eruptions crumbled the Dwarven settlements and their defenses, opening them up to unbearable raids from the Skaven, the Night Goblins, the Greenskins, ogres, trolls, as well as chaos. Some believe this was the work of one last spell of revenge from the elves prior to the loss of their kingdom. Many settlements, Karax, and vast throngs of dwarves were lost, causing the Dwarven Empire to lay scattered, a shadow of its former self. Karak Ungur was the first to fall, followed by Karak Varn, Karak Eight Peaks, Karak Azgal, and Karak Draz. The Dwarves made valiant attempts to protect these holds, but were unable to fight back multiple fronts. Skaven and goblins attacked from below as greenskin and orcs flooded into newly formed openings. The downfall of the Dwarven Empire ended when an alliance was formed with the developing tribes of man, starting with Sigmar himself. The dwarves and their new allies were able to fight back a massive orc invasion, culminating with the Battle of Blackfire Pass, where Dwarven and human armies repelled a Wog, threatening to destroy both empires. Using the same strategy as the Battle of Thermopylae, they forced the massive numbers of the orcs to the narrowest part of the valley, where the green wave of orcs broke on Dwarven shields and human blades. This victory led to the creation of the Empire and allowed the humans to get a foothold in the eastern part of the land. The dwarves could now focus internally, and they attempted to reclaim their lands. Numerous battles against chaos in the human lands of Kislev left High King Alriksson weak and injured, and a council was called to appoint a new king. The new king would be selected based on heroic deeds of all the candidates. When many did not return from their quest, Ungrin Ironfist, the Slayer King, was the favorite candidate for the throne until Thogerin appeared and reestablishing a tie with dwarves from Norska. These deeds and his promise to strike the entire ledger of the Great Book of Grudges led Thogerin to be voted into the throne, and giving him the title of Grudge Bearer. And this is actually where Total War Warhammer will kick off if you select to play the dwarves. This leads us to the unique gameplay mechanic for the dwarves, which is the Great Book of Grudges, or the Damaz Kron. Dwarves put a lot of emphasis on honor, where they even the slightest insult, crime, wrongdoing, or killing to an individual dwarf, settlement, or even against the entire dwarven race can cause a grudge to be issued. And these grudges are usually owned by the kings or rulers of a settlement, or ultimately held by Thorgrim Grudgebearer, who is holding the Great Book of Grudges for the entire dwarven race. Grudges are not forgotten and are a driving force in dwarven culture. Dwarves live for a very long time, much longer than humans, and they will often take grudges to their graves to be carried out by their descendants. Now, this manifests in a gameplay mechanic which gives a constant stream of objective. So if you're someone who likes a lot of structure, or maybe wants Total War to have more structure and less open-endedness, then the dwarves would probably be a pretty good fit for you, considering anytime an outside faction does something against your specific empire, a grudge could be issued, which manifests into an objective as well as an award. And that's seen on the screen here. This is a still taken from the Dwarven gameplay, or the Dwarven single turn video released by Creative Assembly. This also has, this has internal and external benefits and debuffs to your empire. Internally, you can potentially get a reward for carrying out a grudge, but also if you let your grudges, of course, yeah, it's been a long day. Grudges pile up, then you have an empire-wide negative debuff to your public order, as well as to your economics, or to your economy. As you get more into the green with your grudges, this all goes away and actually turns to a benefit where you'll have better public order, as well as from a democratic standpoint, you actually will have better standing with other dwarven tribes as a whole. Going into diplomacy now, this kind of leads into where it's kind of, builds off of the Book of Grudges. I have a feeling, and this is my personal belief, since we haven't gotten too much information about diplomacy for the dwarves, I think this will be very similar to previous Total War games, with only the addition of grudges factoring into this. Within the dwarven economy, dwarves with bigger throngs, with much bigger beards, that are much older, that have much more possessions, they have a far higher standing and are perceived to be a much higher class of dwarf in dwarven culture. So I believe as you progress through, as you conquer more settlements, as you get a better economy, as you progress through your technology tree, other dwarves will see this as a great benefit, and it'll probably be easier to, establish trade networks, form alliances, subjugate, or maybe even have them directly, assimilate into your empire. Compared to the other factions, the dwarven technology tree is pretty vast and pretty complicated. Considering the Greenskins technology tree purely focuses on army efficiency and improving battle, the Empire technology tree is kind of associated with their building tree, and the Vampire accounts have their technology tree around corruption as well as just army prowess. The Dwarven technology tree is based on two different branches. The Way of the Guilds, which is your economical branch, meaning improved resource gathering, improved trade networks, improved empire happiness, so on and so forth. And the Way of the Clans, which is your improvements in battle or improvements in your army effectiveness. And within the lore, dwarves really do not like adapting or adopting new technology, and they much prefer to actually better what they have, meaning they would rather improve on the swords and shields they're currently using than try to find a brand new one or invent a brand new one. And I don't know if this will actually manifest itself into Total War Warhammer, but if it did, I would actually like to see it where maybe a brand new technology tree, meaning like if you're researching how to do gunpowder weapons for the very first time, that would take so much longer than if you're just trying to sharpen a sword or improve your plate mail. I don't know if this is actually how it's going to go down. I almost have a feeling where this is probably just going to be a standard technology tree as in Total War, any other Total Wars, and that it's just going to be the more complex you get, the more it costs to do, as well as the longer it takes. Now, it comes at no surprise that the dwarves live in mountains. They live in these mountain homes called Karaks. And these Karaks provide access to abundant resources, underground trade networks, and vast workshop mines and forges. As you can see in these artist renderings, these are these vast, complex networks of architecture and engineering where the dwarves are second to none. I mean, a Karak in the Warhammer world was an awe-inspiring thing to behold. Nothing could measure up to their defenses, to their shrines, to the technology, to anything that really you could be found in one of these. And on the screen in front of you, you have artist renderings of Karaza Karak, which is the Dwarven capital, also called Everpeak, Karak Kadrin, which is the Slayer stronghold, and Karak Eight Peaks, which is actually taken over by goblins. And as you can see, I mean, these are artist renderings, but I have a feeling they're pretty close to how the lore would actually describe what these Karak should be. Like, Karaza Karak is described to have a forest of pillars that stretches miles long, and that Zufbar, which isn't a Karak that's pictured in front of you. However, Zufbar was a settlement that was shown on the Siege Battles released by some YouTubers after they visited Creative Assembly, I think like a week or two ago now. And we'll remember this when we go to the next slide, because I will show you what Zufbar looks like in game. But Zufbar is described to be this mechanical stronghold of the dwarves with a torrential waterfall crashing down in the center of it. It has visible defenses, but also retractable towers, ironclad gun bunkers, room-protected blast doors, and a air fleet that can be launched from a telescopic launch bay. So, I mean, if that paints any type of picture in your mind, it should be this, spidering network of columns and archways. Should just be an absolute pain for for attackers to try to work through or even get through. Now we're going to go on to what Zufbar actually looked like in-game. Now, the image on the top left here was taken from Jackie Fish's video, and the one on the bottom right was taken from Warrior Sparta's video. And when you look at these, it is extremely underwhelming and kind of extremely disappointing. I'm going to echo some of Indie Pride and Oakley's opinions, or Oakley from THFE Productions, some of their opinions and takeaways from these battles. To me, this is not what a Dwarven Karak should look like. It looks like, to me, a standard settlement with a very gray sky and a few stone pillars. And, of course, a dwarf statue here and there. This is almost like a horrible insult to a Karak of a dwarf. I mean, it's so wide and open. There should be pillars of stone supporting this massive structure over top. There should be all these completely encased stone archways and waterways, and it shouldn't be at all a flat wall with very limited streets and alleyways. It's just a horrible insult to what this was. And for me, the Karaks are actually one of the driving forces why I wanted to play the dwarves probably the most out of any faction. But looking at how these are portrayed, and I'm really hoping that these are just a result of, we wanted to get some footage out there into the public. Let's just let them play the standard settlement. We'll call it Zufbar, and we'll move forward. But I'm really hoping they're revisiting these Karaks and making them better, because right now this really irks me as both a Total War fan as well as a Warhammer fan, and I just really hope this changes, because I think they're missing out on one of the more critical parts of this game, and really making this special to what Warhammer could be. Because even if you looked at like something like Third Age, where they had Moria, their take on Moria was there was a bunch of different tunnels, there's a bunch of different like bridges and archways, and it was very complex. It wasn't just this one linear path, and it almost went want Creative Assembly to make a much better scale of that, considering that was a mod for Medieval 2, which was how old? And this is a brand new technology with a brand new game. They can do so much more with this. Moving on to happier things, we're finally going to get into the Dwarven army composition as well as the Dwarven strategy. And what you have before you is purely taken from the army composition or the army roster listed on the Total War Wiki page. So the Dwarves have 9 melee infantry, 5 missile infantry, absolutely no cav, 2 vehicles which are also their flying infantry or their flying vehicles, which are the gyro bomber as well as the gyrocopter, and 4 artillery. Now we're going to walk through kind of the variations of each and every one of these going forward, and then we'll finally get into the strategy of each one. So going into the melee infantry of the dwarves, these are composed of Dwarven warriors, hammerers, ironbreakers, longbeards, miners, and slayers. And the Dwarven warriors and the longbeards, excuse me, do come with sword and shield variants as well as great weapon variants. And having so many different types of melee infantry, more so than any other faction in the game, this really speaks to what the dwarves are. They are a very high caliber, high skilled, heavily armored army. They are meant for grinding. They are meant for an army to crash against a wall of steel, a wall of dwarven shields, as they basically outgrind and outlast the opposing army. These info cards were taken, or I guess unit info cards, were taken from the video of Ambush at Black Thundering Falls, excuse me. The Dwarven Warriors are your first tier infantry, and the Longbeards are your second tier. Longbeards literally meaning that they have longer beards, meaning they're older dwarves, they've seen more battles, and they're more experienced. And the Slayers are a unique Dwarven infantry. Specifically to them, they're the anti-giant, anti-large infantry. And they're, for a dwarf, they're quick, but to anything else that compared to light cav or what have you, they're not that quick. And the other infantry units that aren't shown here, like the hammers and the iron breakers, these are the elite dwarven units. The hammers are really almost like the empires or the emperors, the high kings, personal bodyguards. It's kind of a throwback to when a high king was visiting mines within the dwarves and the shaft collapsed, and these miners with their hammers basically beat the rock down and freed the high king, and they became this elite unit of bodyguards. So they are they're covered head to toe in the highest armor that you can find in the Dwarven Kingdom, and they wield these massive two-handed hammers. And for them, that's probably the pinnacle of Dwarven armor as well as attack. The Iron Breakers are more so than that because they do come with sword or with hammer and shield, and they're really meant to outlast, where the Hammerers are meant to outdamage. The Miners are kind of within the tier 1 range. They're using their pickaxes as weapons. They can come with blasting charges, which is basically the Dwarven version of a grenade. And if you look at the unit cards in front of you, almost all of them, besides the Slayers, who basically wear no armor to battle because they want to die in a blaze of glory, they actually come with an armor rating as well as armored and shield, or they have charged defense if you have a shield, and the great axes have armor pen, or the great weapons have armor pen and a melee expert. So you can see they have really high base morale, they have really high armor, low speed, and the rest of their stats, I don't know how accurate these will be upon release, since these were an alpha build, but they're pretty similar, which I'm a little surprised about for the Longbeards. But their unit is a little bit smaller. They is only 100 compared to 140, which means of course they're going to have lower health, same with the Slayers. But we'll wait to be seen from there, or what happens upon release. Going into missile units of the Dwarves, there is 5 variants. There's the Quarrelers, the Thunderers, and the Iron Drakes. The Quarrelers, which is the middle unit card here, they are your crossbow unit. They come standard with swords and shields, but they also can come with great axes or great weapons, which is kind of interesting. The Thunderers are your gunpowder class. They're also extremely good against large units as well as armor piercing. Your Iron Drakes are, it's funny, an extremely heavily armored. Heavily armored is a theme with the dwarves, if you couldn't tell already. Flamethrower unit, but they also can come with a troll hammer torpedo variation, which is basically they can shoot a, I guess it'd be like a missile RPG, almost, or maybe like a grenade launcher, but probably more so than a grenade launcher. And the funny thing about Dwarven range units is that, as you can see in the unit cards, they are rated as a decent melee combatant, and if these numbers are the same going into final release compared to the alpha build, they actually have comparable stats to the tier 1 Dwarven warriors. So that means that their range units are almost just as good as their tier 1 melee units. So for any type of army that's trying to rush in their cav or a quicker infantry unit to take out the range to stop the harassment, they're actually gonna be met with a pretty good melee force in their range units in themselves, their missile units. So the Dwarven army, the first two lines, even if you make it through their heavily armored first melee line and you do get to their range units, it's not that easy of a fight. I mean, you almost would want, from a Dwarven standpoint, to completely use all your ammo and then just charge in your range units, considering they're just almost as good as a melee unit. So that filters into the Dwarven strategy that we're going to talk a little bit later on. Okay, going into the vehicles of the dwarves, they have the gyrocopter and the gyro bomber. I'm not sure how different the gyro bomber is to the copter. I know that it has potential to drop additional bombs, but I don't know in terms of stats if it will have additional stat benefits. But this is the quick flanking slash chase down unit for the dwarves. It's their version or their replacement for cavalry, even they have none of it. It is a flying unit, so that's really nice, and it's mainly used to flank out or to attack, skirmishers, artillery, that they can basically just fly over the rest of the battlefield and drop their bombs, causing a lot of distress and interrupting whatever unit they're over top of. However, they are pretty susceptible to missile fire. Another backbone of the Dwarven army is the artillery, and there's 4 variants, but however there's only 2 within this battle. They are the cannon, the flame cannon, the grudge thrower, and the organ gun. The flame cannon is basically a stationary, it's not really a flamethrower, but it shoots a ginormous flaming ball, which causes a lot of fire damage. And this is great for killing weaker, lower tier, low armor units. As you can see on the info card, it's weak against armor, considering, I guess, in the Warhammer universe, fire doesn't do too much against armor. But it's a great terror artillery, and it's a little bit lower range, but it's great for causing a lot of quick, massive damage on a lower tier unit, maybe the first units arriving up toward your line. The organ gun is a lot farther range. It shoots a lot of high damaging projectiles. It's basically a bunch of little mini cannons lined up over one another. As you can see there, it's armor piercing, very much anti-infantry. It's probably similar to the cannon, but the cannon's going to be one high impacting shell versus the organ gun, which is going to be a little bit smaller impacting, but once again, huge missile damage. Considering you can see there that the flame cannon missile damage is a lot higher than the organ gun. I'm not sure if that's total damage, meaning what they're going to do in AoE as well as burn damage, or how that works. And the grudge thrower is the Dwarven version of a catapult. Knowing what units the dwarves have available to them now, we're going to get into kind of the strategy of what you would expect for a Dwarven army. Considering they have extreme numbers in terms of high caliber melee as well as high caliber missile infantry that also do well in melee combat, the strategy for the dwarf, I don't think it could go too many other ways, is a very stationary defensive army. They're going to line up their extremely heavily armored front line. They're going to have their range and artillery behind it, and they're just going to sit there and grind you down until you eventually throw your entire army into their shield wall, which then is either going to basically grind through your already low numbers from their skirmishing. There's no cavalry, and they have no monstrous units, even though for monstrous infantry, they have the Slayers, they have the Thunderers, as well as all their artillery, which would all do well against trying to take out a much larger opponent. So monstrous infantry or monstrous cav isn't really too dangerous to a Dwarven army. The main counter to a Dwarven army, unfortunately, is speed. The dwarves are very slow, they're very stationary, so they really have to sit tight and let enemies come to them, or let their range drive enemies or force enemies to come to them. So any type of army that's composed of a lot of cavalry, a lot of flying units, anything quick is going to pose a very big problem to the dwarves. Because if someone does manage to get a very high, fast-moving flank into a dwarven army, it's going to be hard for them to react, as well as hard for them to shift to try to outmaneuver a fast-paced army. Additionally, dwarves have absolutely no magic units. However, they do have a counter magic unit in terms of the hero Runesmith, which we'll get to in a second. So massive AoE magic, or any type of magical spell could pose a big threat for the dwarves until they get their Runesmith. I don't know if they're going to get a standard magical, a buff against magic prior to the Runesmith, since they're kind of like a racial benefit. That remains to be seen. I have a feeling they won't until they get the Runesmith, so you might just have to rush them going into it to counteract any type of enemy magic. So with going through their actual infantry and their army composition, we're going to go into kind of their lords, heroes, and legendary units. The Dwarven race only has one lord, meaning they only have one type of unit that can lead their armies. This is literally called the Lord. It is a melee class unit, which is going to be what you see you're running around the map. He's probably going to be a better version of the Thane, that is one of the heroes, which is also shown on the screen there, taken from the Ambush at the Thundering Balls video. There's three types of heroes for the dwarves: the Master Engineer, which is a range unit, the Thane, which is a melee champion, and the Runesmith, which would be I would say it's a counter magic hero. I don't know if it's going to be in terms of just granting passive magic buffs onto their own units, causing debuffs to other magical units, or maybe like decreasing the winds of magic around them. I'm not sure how exactly they'll work, but that's how I would hope they would work. So looking at the screen in front of you, the Thane, which is the melee champion, who would have thought, he's well armored, so he's going to be really hard to take down, really grindy, a lot of weapon damage. So he's really much a dwarf that's been through a lot and probably is at the upper echelon of terms of Dwarven society and a type of soldier. I also, just for poops and giggles, threw up or captured High King Thorgrim's his info card, kind of comparing the two. Same armor, he has much higher morale, much the same type of speed, melee attack, melee defense, less than the Thane. Weapon damage still really high, but not nearly as much as the Thane. His charge bonus is almost nothing, considering he's being carried on the back of his shield bearers on the Throne of Power. But just for comparison, they're just about, they're a little bit the same in terms of the actual specifications of the two different types of heroes. Going a little bit more so into the Legendary Lord. So the Legendary Lord would be your starting character. You do get both of them eventually in the campaign, but the Legendary Lord is going to be really control what type of empire-wide benefits you get. For Thorgrim, what he's going to be able to do is he can more easily recruit and maintain Dwarven warriors. For Ungrin, what he can do, he can more easily recruit and maintain slayers. Now, I know additionally, besides just how the army plays, how the empire plays, how the empire management plays out, I know some people, as well as myself, like to play Total War for the role-playing elements, meaning playing a type of empire, bringing them to greatness, or type of rewriting history. So for Thorgrim, his kind of RPG influences would be to strike the ledger of the Great Book of Grudges, meaning fulfilling every grudge the dwarves could currently hold, as well as kind of bringing the dwarves back to their golden age, basically, reclaiming all the Karaks, getting all their trade up, and becoming like the pinnacle race within the world. For Ungrin, it's a little bit different. He was second to Thorgrim in the voting for High King, and in some ways he does believe he should be the High King. So for him, he's trying to go out and prove that he should be the rightful king of the dwarves. This kind of also manifests in the way of he is the Slayer King, which is, if you looked at it, the Slayers are kind of misfit dwarves that have been shunned in some way or have some kind of disgrace, and the only way they could reclaim this is by going out in a blaze of glory and fighting an extremely tough combatant. They wear no armor, and they just carry huge axes in the battle, hoping to slay or die in the field of battle while fighting some monstrous unit. So he kind of used the initiative to basically assert himself into being a king of these misfits, and that's kind of driving him of saying he wants to lead his people as well as the other dwarves in the greatness and kind of show that he should be the rightful king. But he also, since he is a slayer, he's also pursuing that great enemy, that great combatant, that he can finally, take away his disgrace and, die with his honor as a dwarf. And with that, we're going to end our video. I really hope you enjoyed this. Please leave a comment or please give me feedback, whether it's, suggestions, comments, what you'd like to see in the next few videos, as well as if I got anything wrong, if you disagree with me, or if you even second some of my thoughts. Please use this as discussion points down below in the comments or within the Reddit link comments as well. But until then, I have been Atomic Zero of Addicted to Loot. Please join me again sometime.